Hello, everybody, and welcome back to another episode. Today, we have a special guest. We have Mark Walker from Cereals Canada joining us to talk about Canada's looming national rail strike. Mark, welcome. How are you?
Thanks, Tracy. I'm well today. How about yourself?
Good. So before we dive into this topic that I would describe as catastrophic if it happens, why don't we just quickly talk about who you are and your role at Cereals Canada, and then we'll dive right in.
Well, thanks, Tracy. So Cereals Canada is the national value chain organization for wheat, durum, barley, and oats in Canada. These are key crops that we all know are staple in diets around the world. We represent farmers from coast to coast who are getting ready to do such important work at harvest, as well as Canada's major exporters who ship cereals around the world to over 80 markets. So 90% of the crops that we grow, cereal crops that we grow in Western Canada, are shipped. So Regina is about 1,800 kilometers from Tidewater. This means that shipping product by rail is critically important to our industry. Over 85% of our product is moved by rail in Canada. And so in my role as Vice President Markets and Trade, I lead our team's work on market access, policy, crop protection, market development, sustainability, and also government relations.
Excellent. Thank you. So we are recording this at 1:30, August 20th, 2024, a few days before what could be a historic and catastrophic event. So why don't you share a little bit about where we are? I think there's a lot of confusion. We know something bad could happen, and bad's an understatement. But how did we get here, and what exactly is going on?
Yeah, well, there's a bit of backstory here, and there's certainly it's a file with a lot of movement on it, certainly in the last couple of weeks. But negotiations between the companies and the union have been ongoing for some time. Earlier this month, the Canadian Industrial Relations Board, the CIRB, released a decision saying that they would not be engaged in preventing any work stoppages, but that those work stoppages would not be permitted until August 22nd, which of course is now this week. So on August 9th, Canadian Pacific Kansas City, CPKC, issued the Teamsters Canada Rail Conference with a lockout notice for August 22nd. That was quite promptly. And the TCRC, the union, has in turn issued CPKC with a strike notice for August 22nd. CN, for their part, has also issued a lockout notice for August 22nd and is in the process of undertaking a phased shutdown of their network. So in terms of how negotiations are proceeding, we've certainly been told that there's significant daylight between TCRC as well as both companies. The union has said that CPKC wants to significantly alter the collective agreement of all safety-related provisions, focused on fatigue specifically. CPKC says that their offer will maintain the status quo for all work rules and fully complies with new regulatory requirements for rest and will not compromise safety in any way. Moving to the CN component of the negotiations, Teamsters say that CN wants to implement a forced relocation provision and see workers ordered to move across Canada for months at a time to fill labor shortages. In response, of course, and that's important to consider here as well, CN has said that it's made 4 offers this year on wages, rest, as well as labor availability, while remaining fully compliant with government-mandated standards and overseeing duty and rest periods. And it's important to remember here that these are federally regulated companies. So it's not a question of looking at provincial work standards, which we might be more familiar with, but federal labor laws that are in place here.
Okay, excellent. So really at the end of the day, it's rest, fatigue, safety, and then the relocation. That's what this strike is about among their workers.
That is what TCRC is saying this is about. Again, I'm not in the boardrooms.
Right.
I couldn't say exactly where the sticking points are, but
Right.
that's what we're hearing publicly.
Okay, perfect. So here's one really big nuance that I don't think most of us are aware of. Typically, the contract talks between the two companies are staggered. a year apart. So something like this should never happen and has never happened. How did we get here that both of them are in talks at the same time?
Yeah, yeah, a bit of a perfect storm that we're experiencing here.
Yeah.
In 2022, after the federal government introduced new rules on fatigue, CN requested a year-long extension to its existing deal, and they were granted that. So what this resulted in was two railways having labor agreements that expired in the same year. And I would say, those two railways are meaningfully the bulk, the vast majority of what we have access to in terms of rail service. So given the intent to strike, this leaves us with neither railway running by the end of the week. Beyond that, I can't necessarily speculate on what the sticking points are or how negotiations are proceeding behind closed doors. But certainly that there is, as far as we have available to us now, as you said earlier, there's an upcoming work stoppage and a lot of concerns around the country right now.
Okay. And we'll chat a little bit more about where we're at right now. And you have touched on that. Let's go to, what does this look like? Because as farmers, we go, uh-oh, we need to get our grain off the farm. We need to get paid. And everybody, we're in our own little silo, right? And we're thinking about our world, as we should. But as you start to think about this and hear about it, it's so much obviously bigger than what we even think. So what does this look like for Canada, for trade, our reliability as a trade partner, for retail, for consumers, food security? And then we'll do a second follow-up question about what does that look like for farmers? So let's talk about that first one.
For sure. So maybe I'll just blend both into one if I could.
Sure, do
Great.
that.
And so, but as of right now, the rail industry is poised for a total stoppage beginning August 22nd. We discussed that.
Yep.
So there will effectively be no rail service in Canada past that date until negotiations are successful. And I think that's the key point here. The negotiations need to be successful. But with both railways out of service, the consequences are enormous. You've mentioned this yourself. Both farmers and exporters. We have seen situations in the past where we have seen railways couldn't haul grain to the West Coast due to weather-related events, whether that was snowstorms, line outages, cold conditions. So that gives us a bit of indication about how this might play out over the next few days and potentially weeks. In these circumstances, we've seen that when rail isn't running, grain can't get to Tidewater, can't get to the ports where the ships are waiting to take that food to customers. I mentioned that Canadian cereals are exported to over 80 markets around the world. I'm getting calls from our customers around the world saying, what's happening with this work stoppage? How is it proceeding? When can we expect that it'll be resolved? There's a lot of unknowns that we're trying to pin down here that unfortunately, sometimes it's just waiting for that press release to come out. So what this is going to do, however, is create significant extra costs due to the delays and could end up causing food shortages. Canada plays a critical role in global food security due to the good work that farmers do and their ability to get crop off farm into elevators and to Tidewater. So if these delays are long enough, we could see significant impacts, not just in Canada, but also around the world. So the critical factor, though, is that for our members, the farmers and the grain shippers, the problems won't end when the strike ends. What we've seen in the past is that the shipping delays completely disrupt what is an otherwise well-functioning supply chain. And it's very coordinated. It can operate quite well. But if the right grain isn't arriving at the right time, grain is competing with consumer goods, with lumber, with cars, with inputs, and all the other products that need to move through limited rail car capacity. And so the fact that this strike is going to affect rail traffic moving both east as well as west will affect all rail, suggests the impacts could be worse than we've seen in the past. So what this means is that everything can remain disrupted for months. Logistics folks would say that one day's strike results in many days worth of supply chain disruption. If a work stoppage happens on August 22nd, and indeed we have no reason to believe at this time that it won't happen, keeping it as short as possible is absolutely essential. So because of how the system operates, we won't be able to meaningfully clear the backlog of unshipped goods if this goes on for any significant amount of time. We just won't be able to get that lost economic opportunity back. For agri-retailers, for producers, not only are they looking to get product off farm, looking to make deliveries to those elevators, which will get full, and then they won't be able to purchase more grain from producers. We're also looking at fall sales programs. So on the one hand, folks won't be able to deliver, they might not also be able to purchase. So importing nitrogen, shipping potash by rail, those supply constraints will be significant. It's also important to remember, of course, that we do ship a lot of fuel by rail in Canada, and that won't be moving either. So, really a bit of a perfect storm that we're staring down the barrel of here.
Thank you. That's a great explanation and a great way to summarize it. I heard one of my former professors, Barry Prentice, say that for every day it's down, it will take a week to catch up if that's what ends up happening. And like you just said, it's such a trickle down, we don't even think of it. And then the competition to get going, right? A little bit of a riff here, and I think we all feel it, and I'll state it for the farmers that are going to be going, yeah, Tracy. But if you look at it, I mean, there's no good time for this to happen. And technically it shouldn't, and that's probably why it's staggered. But you look at it, prime season for farmers, and then like you said, you look at it from a farmer's perspective. All that money is tied up, right, in our field. We need that crop off. We have debt to service, huge interest rates that we're paying. We also need to free up line of credit to be able to not only make more payments, but buy next year's inputs. And where are those inputs going to be along this? It just, and this doesn't sound fair, but from the silo of where we're at, it doesn't even seem like this should be an option. Oh, and yes, yes, everybody's rights is important, but from looking at the big picture and what's at stake, this shouldn't be allowed. So I'll end my riff there and go into my next question. What can the federal government do, and why has there been no action so far?
Yeah, well, and perhaps I could just go back just a moment, because
Sure,
I feel like you touched on a really, really good point. Without those grain companies buying and taking delivery of grain, producers can't get paid. We've touched on that. There's significant financial hardship. You touched on the disruptions lasting for quite some time. In 2023, the Canadian cereal sector exported $13.8 billion worth of product. It's a great number, and it's part of the reason that the cereal sector generates $68.8 billion for the Canadian economy every year. There's 370,000 jobs relying on that good work that producers are doing in their fields every day, and obviously a critical time of the year that we're entering at this very moment. But looking at the economic impacts from the rail stoppage, if this goes into next week, we're looking at hundreds of millions of dollars of economic opportunity lost that we just won't be able to recover from. So every metric that you want to assign, it can't be recovered, which is the worst part here. And so, while coverage of the strike will certainly focus on what contract terms of railways and unions are arguing over, it's really important to keep in mind all the collateral damage that's done with the rail strike. The railways are known as Canada's economic artery for a reason. The cost to the parts of the economy that aren't at the negotiating table are very high. And we're seeing that, getting ready to play out here. We can't afford to wait and hope that an agreement will come quickly. There has to be a different process to get an agreement, and you touched on that. We're all price takers here, and unfortunately, we're currently beholden to this process.
Yeah, it just, when you weigh that out, it's like, how can, I've seen one number floating around 9,000, and I think that was just one rail line. So
Right.
Double it, triple it.
Yeah.
To what is at stake and the loss and the number of jobs and the dollars. It just doesn't seem like this should be allowed to happen. And I guess that's, why isn't the government doing something? Why aren't they forcing them, legislating them back to work? What's your thoughts on what the government can do, and if there's been anything done, any action they can take?
Yeah, so the federal government has a number of tools at its disposal. They've already used one in referring the question to the Canadian Industrial Relations Board, the CIRB, but that board declined to weigh in and essentially delayed the current specter of work stoppage until this week. So there are other tools, though, that the Minister, Cabinet, and of course the House of Commons, the legislative process you mentioned, could look to enact. However, what we're seeing as the clearest path currently forward is for the Minister using Section 107 of the Canada Labour Code to refer the dispute to the CIRB and use that process to enact binding arbitration within a very specific time frame. What's really critical here, and we've been talking about this this afternoon at length, but this cannot go on for a sustained period of time. The cost is simply too high. It's essential to maintain and secure our industrial capacity here in Canada.
Thank you. Well said. We still have some time. We still have some time. I'm the ever optimist, and I think farmers, naturally we are. So let's
Absolutely.
cross our fingers and hope. So I'm going to change tone a little bit on the show here and our platform. I always think of myself as a fierce defender of farmers. I am one. This is my platform. So I'm always looking out for the farmer. And I think right now, some of the biggest frustration we have is who's defending us? Who's talking for us? The railroad companies have their unions. Who's there? Who has the farmers back? And I guess one step deeper than that, we hear a lot of talk about where are the commodity groups? Where are all our checkoff dollars going? What are they doing? So I'm going to put that out there and see if you'd like to speak to that, because I know there's a lot of this discussion going on right now.
For sure. And, folks are right to be frustrated. You mentioned how this is happening. We are unique in the G7, developed, trading nations, that our railways and the unions they work with, as well as our government, allow this to happen far too frequently. For our part, Cereals Canada has been communicating with government well in advance of August of this month about the issue, about the specter of a work stoppage, and weekly with government this past month. It's critically important that all parts of our supply chain continue to raise this issue in every way they can. And we've certainly taken on and are championing this issue with the federal government and with ministers' offices. We've consistently conveyed hardship. We've been discussing it this afternoon at length, that this will visit on producers at the most critical time of year, and concrete steps that can be taken to mitigate and resolve the situation. But we're also working with other commodity groups and supply chain groups to bring a united voice to government to try and ensure the timely resolution of the issue.
Wonderful. I guess that's the best we can do, right?
Yeah.
That's the best we can do. Okay, thank you for that. So I seen a petition circulating around, and it's located at stopthestrike.ca. I filled out, it's literally your name, your email, who your MP is. It's really quick. Do you want to speak to that a little bit more and give some information for farmers?
Absolutely. It's critical that government hears from producers on this issue. Critical mass is really what's going to help move the needle. But stopthestrike.ca is a collaborative effort amongst Canada's grains value chain. And I would certainly ask producers who might be listening today to visit stopthestrike.ca, send in a letter to government, send in a letter to your MP about why this is so important, how this is impacting you, how this is going to impact you. Government really needs to hear from folks out there.
I love it. Thank you. I've filled it out, and you in the audience do it too. We gotta get that mass volume, right? We're herd in numbers. So Mark, any final parting words to our audience of farmers who are frustrated, fearful, and let's say all the emotions on the spectrum right now?
Well, as I said, folks are right to be frustrated. Please let your voice be heard. Visit the website, stopthestrike.ca, send in that letter. But really, Tracy, I just want to thank you so much for your time. We really appreciate the opportunity to help about the work we're doing and about what farmers can do, discuss what avenues there are for involvement, and hopefully help bring a resolution to and help avoid a possible work stoppage here.
Wonderful. Thank you, Mark. I really appreciate your time. I appreciate you sharing all the stats and great information and work you guys are doing. Thank you on behalf of farmers. So thank you for joining us, Mark. I really appreciate it.
Thank you, Tracy.
You're welcome. And you in the audience, visit stopthestrike.ca, record your information, and let us be heard that this is not acceptable. Thank you, everybody, and we'll see you next time. Bye-bye.